you want to turn your Bibles to Exodus 24. Exodus 24. And that is where we will be tonight, and we will read most of that chapter here in just a moment. But before we do that, I got some questions for us to think about to get us thinking and get us in the mindset for the passage that we're going to try to explore and deep dive tonight. And the first question is this. How do you, if I can get there it is. How do you feel about blood? We got big fans of blood? Anybody? Oh, you a fan of blood? What? Go ahead. It's what? Blood is normal, okay? Definitely. Blood is a normal thing. If you don't have blood, then that's going to be a problem, right? Yes, sir. All right. It is the source of life, all right? These are kind of positive things. That's not really what I was going for. But what else? Yes, Lydia. I like it inside, not outside. There we go. Now we are heading more in the right direction. Yes, Lucas. Okay, it's nasty. All right, I would agree with that. Yes, Miss Ethel. It's relational. Okay, a little different way of looking at blood, and a little more metaphorically, but definitely it is relational. Yes, ma'am. Say it one more time. It can help you medically. Oh, it tells about who you are medically. Okay, definitely so. I'm not like a fan of blood, right? But I'm not like against blood either. All right. One of the things that I did when I was younger. In fact, what I originally went to school for is I was wanting to be a doctor, and I was a pre-med major at Freed-Hardeman University, and the plan was to be a doctor and eventually do missionary trips. I did a missionary trip when I was 16 years old, and I was in Nicaragua, and it was a medical mission trip, and this is my first experience outside the country and all of those things, and my main job was in charge of facilities, if you will. Me and some of the other guys, my buddies Denny Howell, who visited not too long ago, we had to keep the kids away from the facility, and I had green BDUs on, and they called me Godzilla. I didn't really appreciate that, but that was okay. And did some other things, make sure the water was purified and stuff. But one day I got to sit in on an oral surgery. There was kids that they referred to as sweet gums. Because they did not have the proper nutrition, one of the things they got even as young kids was a lot of sugary drinks. And because of that, and because of poor hygiene, their teeth would rot. And so we're talking about young little kids, okay, 3 years old, with a mouth just full of rotted teeth. And so one of the things that they were doing is they were pulling teeth. And my job that day was to hold a flashlight. That's all I had to do, was to hold a flashlight. At the time, I had a little brother who was about that same age as a lot of those kids. And for whatever reason, that's what I was thinking about. And I was thinking, and the kids were crying. We didn't really have a bunch of Novocaine or anything for them. And the kids were crying, and there was a lot of bleeding. And at some point in time, the flashlight went from being directly on the spot it was supposed to be on to started doing this number. And the hygienists and dentists that were sitting there, they looked up at me and said, "David, are you okay?" And they said, "How about you sit down?" And I sat down because for whatever reason at that moment, blood bothered me. But it's not something that necessarily usually bothers me. But as far as we as a people, we as a culture, we don't think about blood in the same way that other people think about blood. The other illustration that I have is also when I was in high school. I had the opportunity to be a part of what we call a pig picking. Okay, a pig picking in Tennessee is also known as a hog roast, and that's basically where you purchase a hog and you cook it, you barbecue it. And I, as being one of the teenage boys, I got to be a part of the process of taking live pig to barbecue, which I had never done before. I didn't really want to eat the barbecue. after I got through with that entire process. It was a bloody mess. There was a lot of things going on that I'd rather just think about ordering a thing of barbecue and getting, the finished product and not thinking about all the other things that go in place. Okay, let's think about this. What are some words you would use to describe blood? Yes, Torrance. Red, definitely. Blood is red. Gory, okay? Nasty. You keep going with the nasty. That's good, Lucas. Definitely, it's nasty. What about if you have on clothes and you get blood on your clothes? A stain. It stains. It can be difficult to get out of, right? Especially if you're like me, sometimes wearing a white, dress shirt on Sunday mornings. Don't want to necessarily get blood on your clothes. I had a problem with nosebleeds when I was very young, all the way until I was in college. Even after college. There was one Sunday night when I was preaching in South Carolina that right before I got up to preach, nosebleed. And so I had to run out, and thankfully there's another guy that kind of filled in for a second, and then I came back in with my nose packed with tissue, and I preached for the whole sermon like this, right? But it messes up clothes. It stains. It's when you taste it, it's got a very distinct taste. It's got a smell to it. It's not something that is very appetizing. Hopefully everybody's already eaten, right? No. But later on, don't think about this, but think about it right now. And we live in a society that is very sanitized when it comes to blood. But that is not the way the Old Testament people lived. It was a very bloody, bloody, bloody religion. There was a lot of blood that was going on. All right, let's think about this. In the Hebrew mind, how would you think the Hebrew thinks about blood? Would he think about blood the same way Lucas keeps saying, as it being nasty? Okay, how would they think about it? All right, a normal thing? Atoning thing? Okay, atoning is one of those, one of those Bible words that as soon as you say it, it has a lot of baggage along with it. But atoning, what does atoning mean? What does it mean to have atonement? Okay, to make things right. All right, say again. Okay, to reconcile. Let's look in your Bibles real quick, and I know you turned to Exodus 24, so just hold your place there in Exodus 24, and turn over to Hebrews 9:22 real quick also. Hebrews 9:22. And notice what the Hebrew writer says here. He says, and according to the law, almost all things are purified with blood. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't make sense to me. Because if I think about blood, I'm not thinking about something being purified. I'm thinking about something that's going to be very difficult to get out of my clothes. But in their mind, blood was a part of a purification process. So let's ask this. Why or how then does blood cleanse or purify? Yes? Okay, because God says it does. I agree. God definitely says it does. And I think that God had said it does very early on, and so we'll even see other cultures that are not the Hebrew culture that also have the idea that blood is purifying. What else do you think about? Yes? Okay, wow. Okay, you're ready for school. He said white blood cells fight off bacteria. Definitely so, definitely so. But how is blood purifying as far as when we think about sin? Because the very next thing, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. Yes? Okay, with blood there is sacrifice. So when we use this word blood, what we are referring to is actually a sacrifice. We're not just saying just any blood, like walking around, because there was sometimes that being around blood was a bad thing in the Old Testament. The same thing that could purify you could also make you unclean if you're around something that was dead. blood was also something that had to be drained out of your food and such. Remember, one of the only commands, if you will, given to the Gentiles, as far as in Acts chapter 15, a part of the Jerusalem Council, is that you do not eat things with the blood in it. So it seems to be oxymoronic in some ways. Yes? Okay, blood is associated with a person or living beings, so we're talking about animals, like a life. So here we start to understanding this atonement idea, and the reason why blood is so important, especially in the Old Testament, because in order to have blood, there had to be a death of some type. We never have sacrifice that is involved with, like in Romans chapter 12, a living sacrifice, right? When Abraham was taking Isaac up onto the mountain to sacrifice him, he knew good and well that he was going to have to do what to Isaac? To kill him. You can't just sacrifice him and say, well, I'm going to cut him. We're going to spill some blood, and that's going to be good. We're going to call that good. No. There had to be a death. There had to be blood shed, blood applied, blood given in order for there to be purification. Okay? So let's think about all of those things, get all of that stuff in your head, and let's look at Exodus chapter 24. And we're going to see this phrase, blood of the covenant. Okay? Exodus and in chapter 24, just to give us a little bit of context, we're still at Mount Sinai. All right? The Ten Commandments has been delivered. It's not been put on stone yet, but it's been delivered to Moses, and Moses is in the process of telling the people all the different commandments. Moses in a moment is going to go back up on the mountain, and he's going to hear a whole bunch of other things, because there's so much more than just the Ten Commandments that are given on the mountain, like all the tabernacle stuff, how things are supposed to be done, and all of that stuff. But let's look in Exodus chapter 24, and we'll start in verse 1. It'll be a lengthy reading, but pay attention of what's going on here, okay? It says, "Now he said to Moses, 'Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, and Nadab and Abihu,'" who are the sons of Aaron, his oldest sons, "'and the 70 elders of Israel, and worship from afar. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him.' So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, 'All the words which the Lord has said, we will do.' And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel." Verse 5, "Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it into basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book or the scroll of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, 'All that the Lord has said, we will do and be obedient.' And Moses took the blood and he sprinkled it on the people and said, 'This is the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you according to all these words.'" Verse 9, "Then Moses went up, also Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand, so they saw God, and they ate and drank. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you the tablets of stone, the law of the commandments, which I have written, that you may teach them.' Verse 13, "So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up onto the mountain of God, and he said to the elders, 'Wait here for us until we come back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you, and if any man has difficulty, let him go to them.' Then Moses went up onto the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain." All right, here's our goals for tonight, okay? In the time that we have left, we have two goals. The first goal is this, is to try to understand what is happening and why. And then our second goal is to see how this relates to us, okay? So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at what's going on in this text. We're going to ask the question, what's happening here? Why is it happening? Try to understand that. But that doesn't make a difference if we don't understand how it relates to us, okay? And so that is our goal, and we'll see how quickly we can do this. So I may be talking more and let you talk less, just letting you know, okay? So first of all, what happens and why? So the first thing we see that happens in the text is that Moses speaks the word, okay? Now, what word is he speaking to the people there in Exodus 24? All right, the word of the Lord. Moses is acting as a what here? A mediator, a messenger. We have a very biblical word for that. A prophet, right? He is acting as a prophet and speaking the word of the Lord. And if you remember earlier, we kind of referenced this in our Sunday morning sermon from Exodus 20. The people were tired of hearing the Lord speak himself because it was just too much. And they wanted Moses to be that mediator, to be that prophet, to speak the word of the Lord. So the first thing that Moses does is Moses speaks the word of the Lord to them, okay, so they can know what he says. And then the people, they agree. What do they say? They say, we will do everything that the Lord says. Right? You know the rest of the story, though, right? You know what happens in the next episode. And so we realize they don't do everything that he says. But at the beginning, he speaks, and they say, we'll do what he says. But I think about, a lot of my illustrations go back to parenting because it happens every day. When you're talking to one of your kids sometimes about something that you want them to do, when they're right there in front of you, what do they say? Oh, yeah, I'll do that. It's different, though, when the parent's gone, right? Then there's other forces that come in. But right now, they're going to do what he says. All right? The next thing that happens is that Moses writes down the word. And I think this is so important that we sometimes miss, is that the Hebrew religion, the religion of the Israelites, Judaism, is a written history, is a written religion. And that's so important because when we come into the New Testament, we also have it written down. And it's important for it to be written because we realize that if things are just verbal, that what can happen? It can get lost, it can get confused, it can get misheard, and all of those things, but it is written. We can go and look and read for ourselves what is actually there. And this is a process that the New Testament people did because they're coming out of the Old Testament. The Old Testament was written. Do you realize that one of the reasons why you have books is because of Christianity? The Christians invented the Codex. The Codex was, instead of writing on a scroll, they wrote on pieces of parchment, and they would write on both sides of it, and that would sit like a book. That's why you have books, is because Christians wanted to write the stuff down so they could give it to other people also. But this law, these words of the Lord, are written. Okay? After these words of the Lord are written, there is an altar that is built. And this is where and sacrifices that are prepared by these young men, whoever these young men are. Why is there a need to be an altar? Well, first of all, the altar has what's interesting about this altar? It's got 12 stones or 12 pillars, and we'll find out later on that these pillars are like natural earth pillars, not like hewn out of stone, but they're natural. And maybe there's another point for another time about that. But there's these natural stones. There's 12 of them that represent the 12 tribes. Why do we need an altar? Why do we need these sacrifices prepared? All right, for God. Okay, God's requesting it, although he hasn't, we don't have him saying it here. We realize he asks for sacrifices other places. But what's going on here? What's the why behind this, other than just God has commanded it? Okay, it's a place of gathering. Yes, ma'am. Okay, for people to put together how holy the whole thing is, okay? We are making a covenant, and as we're making this covenant, a part of the covenant process is that there's going to be sacrifice. Now, if you go back to Genesis, in 15? When the Lord cuts the covenant, to make a covenant means to cut a covenant. That's the literal term in the Hebrew. When he cuts a covenant with Abraham, Abraham takes animals and cuts them in half and puts one on one side and one on the other side, and he walks with God in between them. Okay? So is this whole idea behind this cutting of these animals and these animals being sacrificed that is part of this ratification process of this covenant that they have agreed to. Okay? Now here's the most interesting part, is that he takes the blood, he takes half of the blood and puts it in basins, in bowls. And he takes half of the blood and he puts it on the altar. Now, I don't know how many oxen were involved, but I can imagine one oxen can bleed a lot. But I'm imagining that we're having lots of oxen. In fact, what I'm imagining is that we are slaughtering enough oxen so that all of the people, at least the adults, can eat of that oxen. So there's a lot of blood that is involved. And half of it is put on the altar. Okay? Why is the blood put on the altar? Okay, atonement. Okay, to consecrate it. So it is being made special. It is being made holy. There's atonement that is going on here, saying that this covenant that we are making, this covenant is going to cost life. If you're going to be in an agreement with God, now notice that when we make covenants today, it's like a back and forth process, right? We say, okay, you're willing to do this? Okay, I'm willing to do that. Okay, that's not the way it works with God. God says, here's my covenant. You can accept it or you can deny it. We're not having a back and forth. We're not going to say, okay, well, I'll put in this much and you put in that much. No, this is it. This is it right here. You can agree to the terms or you cannot agree to the terms. And after all the mountain shaking and things, I agree that they should agree with the terms, right? But part of this also is this blood that is put on the altar. Right after that, then Moses now takes the words that were written down in that scroll, in that book, and he reads them. So first it was verbal, and there was an initial assent to it, an agreement to it. Then there was blood applied to an altar. Then he reads the things like, hey, do you remember what we agreed about? This is what it is. And then the people agree again. Everything that you have said, we are willing to obey and to do. And then this happens. He throws blood on the people. Yeah, exactly. Quincy said, Eve. Yeah, I agree. Don't do that. Thank you, Lucas. It's nasty, right? I don't know. What a weird church service, inviting your friends to church, and what's going to happen? Well, you're going to have blood thrown on you, Don't wear your Sunday best because, you might want to wear like a raincoat or something, protect yourself from what's going to happen. But this is interesting. He throws blood on them. The same sacrifices that are placed on the altar with their blood, some of that blood is placed upon them. Just as we are consecrating, making holy, we are setting apart the altar, the people are being set apart also. The same blood that was from those oxen that was used in that sacrifice is the same blood that is now also upon each and every one of them. And notice what it says again there in verse 8. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, this is the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you according to all of these words. This is the blood of the covenant. The next thing that happens that we kind of sometimes miss perhaps is that there's this meal that the 70 elders, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and Aaron and Hur and Moses have with God. They sit on the mountain of the Lord, and God is in their presence, and they eat, and they drink. They have this fellowship meal because they are now in covenant with one another. And they are ratifying this covenant by a time of celebration, of food, of eating. And what are they eating? They're eating the oxen that they killed, because not all of it was burned. Some of it, most of it actually was usually kept so that they could also partake of that food also. All right. So now with all of that in our head in the last 10 minutes that we have, how does that relate to us? And we'll open it up real quick. How does this relate to us? There's some things that should be, if your church at all, right, they're just jumping in your head right now. Yes, sir. Definitely so. It foreshadows the Lord's Supper. And what's interesting is Matthew and Luke, what words do they have on Jesus' lips? This is the blood of the new covenant. This is my blood of the new covenant. Okay? I saw another hand back here, maybe. I did not. Okay. What other things that you think of, perhaps, relate to us? Yes? All right. In baptism, we even sing the song, there is power in the blood, right? And we come in contact with his death, and it was in his death that his blood was shed. Definitely so. All right, here's just a couple things that I want you to see from this. First of all is the correlation between Moses and Jesus. And you can write these verses down, you can look at them later, but Deuteronomy in chapter 18 and in verse 15, Moses is telling the people that one day there will come a prophet like him who will speak to the people and who they better listen to. In Deuteronomy in chapter 34 and verse 10, we have this editor's note, if you will, that says that after Moses, no one has risen up to be like him. But then you jump into the Gospels, especially the Gospel of John. In John chapter 1, and you find out that people are asking, is this Elijah? Is this the prophet? Now, the question, first of all, is this Elijah to John the Baptist? The answer is no. And then, is this the prophet? Is not talking about Elijah, it's talking about Moses. You jump to John chapter 6, after the feeding of the 5,000 and this bread from heaven idea, and the people start to make the correlation, and they ask the question, could this be the prophet? Thinking about Moses. And then you jump to John chapter 7 and around verse 40 or so. Again, they had the idea that this is the prophet. So Jesus and Moses, you're supposed to see Jesus with Moses right here. Moses is the one who says the words, this is the blood of the covenant. Moses is the one that delivers the word. What we see in the New Testament is that Jesus is even better, not because he delivers the word, but because what? He is the word. If you want to know what the word looks like, if you want to know how the word lives, if you want to know what the word prays about, if you want to know how the word interacts with the world, you look at the word who is Jesus. So we see the correlation there. The other big correlation is the idea of the blood of the new covenant. And again, we're not going to take time tonight to read all these passages, but this Matthew 26:28, Mark 14:24, Luke 22:20, and 1 Corinthians 11:25 all refer to the Lord's Supper and all talk about that blood of the covenant in some way or another. Over in Hebrews 9:22 through 24, we already looked at a little bit, looked at verse 22, but verse 24 we find out that Jesus is going to be the one that is the actual sacrifice, okay? 12:24 we read this morning refers to that blood that is sprinkled. And I think it's 24, yeah. And also in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 2, again, we have this idea of the sprinkled blood. So something that I want you to realize is that when we take the Lord's Supper, we are reenacting our agreement to the covenant. What we are doing, I realize that we are taking a little piece of bread and we have a little drink of grape juice. But what that's supposed to be reenacting is just as Moses said, this is the blood of the covenant, and therefore you are agreeing to follow it. The reason why we take the Lord's Supper every first day of the week is so we can be reminded of that and say again, make a new commitment. I'm following the covenant. I am agreeing that I will follow the covenant. And instead of it being blood of oxen, Jesus says, this is my blood. It is my blood that is being shed so that you can be a part of this covenant. Okay, we got 3 minutes. So look at this, okay? Jesus is the answer in Exodus 24. Okay, I want to notice just real quick several different ways that Jesus fulfills all the things of Exodus 24. First of all, Jesus is Moses. Okay, he is the better Moses. That's even what Hebrews chapter 3 talks about. Moses was a servant in the house. Jesus is a son over the house, right? So he's better than Moses. Jesus is the covenant. He is the word. If you want to know what this covenant looks like, it looks like Jesus. A covenant, what's another word we give for covenant? A testament? Another word. What? A contract? An agreement? Let's start with a P and end with an amos. Promise, very good. Okay, it's a promise. God keeps his promises. How do you know he keeps his promises? His son died on a cross for you. I'm going to keep the promise. And so I am in a covenant, I am in a promise relationship also. And I'm so thankful that even as Paul points out, when I am unfaithful, guess what God still is? He's still faithful, right? But when I was baptized, when anyone is baptized, what they are saying is I am agreeing to the covenant. I am wanting to have that blood applied to me, and I'm agreeing that I am going to do all the things that you have commanded. And that is why he is the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. And it makes sense. That's what you agreed to. That's the covenant. Jesus also is the blood on the altar. The book of Hebrews does a wonderful job. We find out that Jesus actually takes his own blood, and he does not go to a physical altar here on earth, but he has gone beyond the veil into the presence of the Lord. This is Hebrews chapter 6, around verse 20, 19 and 20, somewhere right in there. He goes into the presence, and he applies his own blood for our atonement. That's what he does for us. Jesus also is the blood on the people. If you are going to be saved, if you're going to be sanctified, if you're going to be set apart, you must have the blood on you. That is that, we talked about in our little invitation, that is that sun protection, if you will, is the blood of Jesus upon you. Remember over in Revelation chapter 7 and verse 14, I believe, when John is having this vision of heaven and he sees those people who have taken their robes and they have washed them where? In the blood of the Lamb. If your clothes have not been washed in the blood of the Lamb, then you're not saved. And so we have to be in contact with that blood, and that happens when we come in contact with his death, and we do that through baptism. And one final thing is that Jesus invites us to eat with him. Just as they had this fellowship meal, if you will, on the mountain, we get a glimpse of that every single Lord's Day. When we partake of, I know we don't actually have the elements up here, but this is where we think about it, right? We are in a fellowship meal with the Lord. It is a precursor, it is a preview of coming attractions, if you will, of our time to be together with him in eternity. And notice who is at this table. I'm at that table. Jesus is at that table. And you all are at that table too. And we all come to this table because we all get to think about when we actually be in his presence. Remember what even Jesus said, I think it's in the Matthew 26 passage. I will not eat this with you again until I what? Eat it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. In other words, saying, hey, we're having this meal now, but we're going to have it again. We're going to have it again. And then it's just going to be this awesome wedding feast, if you will. Another correlation that is made through all those things. So, the point of all of this is to hope that you realize that in Exodus 24, For these people back there on Mount Sinai thousands of years ago, what does it have to do with me? Is Jesus. All of that happened to help prepare the people for Jesus. And so now we can look back at what they did, and the more we understand about them, the more we get to be amazed about what's happening in our own lives, of what Jesus is doing for us too. In 2 weeks, Lord willing, we will look at another section as we go through the book of Exodus and talk about the presence of God and talk about God's dwelling place and look at the ark and all of those things. Thank you for all your time and attention. Let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you so very much for all the many ways that you bless us, and we realize, as Paul has told us, that we find all of those spiritual blessings in Christ Jesus in heavenly places. Father, thank you for your Old Testament word. Help us to be people of the book. Help us to be people of the covenant, to understand it, to think about it, to meditate upon it, to see just how awesome it is even in our own lives. We thank you for sending your son Jesus to be everything. As we even sing sometimes that he is my everything and he is my all. He is that Moses, he is that lawgiver, he is that prophet, he is that sacrifice, he is that covenant, he is that word, he is the blood on the altar, and he is the blood on the people, he is the blood that is on me. And how awesome it is that Jesus was willing to do all of that for us sinful people. Father, watch over us as we depart from this place. Please be with everyone's safety and the different things that may be happening with the storm right now. And just give us a wonderful week in service to you. And as we look forward to seeing one another again when we can come back together, and as we look forward to being with one another in eternity with you and having that meal together one day in heaven. We ask all these things in your Son's name, and amen.